Please welcome Mr. Satish Lele, Vice President Frost & Sullivan, who will share on SMF's first ever study on BMI implementation in the Singapore context. Mr. Satish will present the preliminary findings of the survey outcomes in Singapore and a cross-examination of global MNCs as well. He will also provide insights into the importance of organizational and HR factors in developing awareness and creating an environment for successful implementation of BMI. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Satish.
Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. So good afternoon, everybody. This is after the post-lunch session. So hopefully you can focus and listen to what I have to say. First of all, I think I would really like to thank SMF for launching this particular study related to business model innovation. From what I hear from the survey, is that this is probably one of the first such surveys that has been done globally on such a large scale. So I think the outcome of this particular survey is going to be very interesting for Singapore, as well as for understanding what is the trends that we see in business model innovation at a global level as well. So in terms of the presentation that I have today, I'll take you through a few different steps. The first one will be a very quick introduction of Frost & Sullivan. SMF has given me very strict instructions not to speak for more than 1 minute, but I will just speak a little bit about what we do in terms of the manufacturing space that we cover as part of the work that we do. I will talk about the project objectives for this particular study that we are doing for Singapore, look at the research methodology that we adopted in terms of completing this particular survey and study, and I will share some of the initial findings from this study. Now, just to give the perspective right, these are very, very preliminary findings. We have just about completed the survey phase, so there's still a lot of analysis that still needs to be done for this particular survey. But we will give you some indicators of what kind of results that we are going to see as far as business model innovation in Singapore is concerned. And also we would like to say what are some of the next steps that can potentially be for Singapore. So very quickly for Frost & Sullivan, this is a 50-year-old company. Our main work is related to market growth and consulting. But what I would really like to tell is we have been focusing around manufacturing for a long period of time, and we bring a lot of thought leadership related to manufacturing. The idea behind doing this particular project was also to have a very good understanding of the Singapore manufacturing sector, and to also understand what are the key challenges and issues that manufacturers face today, both MNCs as well as SMEs, in terms of staying competitive as far as the manufacturing environment is concerned. So we do a lot of thought leadership related to factories of the future, what is going to be the big changes that we are going to see in the manufacturing environment. People talk about Industry 4.0, people talk about Internet of Things, how all of this is related to the manufacturing industry, and what kind of relevance does it have for manufacturers here in Singapore. So all of these are very important themes that we have been thinking about, discussing and debating within our organization as well, and that is the credibility that we bring as far as the manufacturing environment is concerned. Now, why is manufacturing so relevant for Singapore as well? If you look at this region, ASEAN, Singapore has still been able to maintain a 20+% as far as its contribution to GDP is concerned even today. Although given it is a very challenging environment as far as manufacturing is concerned. But what is more important is a lot of other ASEAN countries which are actually moving up very quickly as far as their manufacturing capability is concerned. If you look at countries like Indonesia and Vietnam, these are still very early as far as the manufacturing part is concerned. But they are growing very, very rapidly in terms of their ability to take away manufacturing from high growth economies are concerned. And we are seeing a lot of investment coming in countries like Indonesia and Vietnam. So there is a lot of challenge for Singapore in the region itself, as well as challenges which are coming at a global level as far as manufacturing is concerned. So it is extremely important in the competitiveness perspective that we need to understand where Singapore stands as far as manufacturing competitiveness is concerned. So there is a survey which Deloitte does every, I think, 2 years or 3 years, which ranks countries in terms of manufacturing competitiveness. If you look at Singapore's ranking, it is at number 9. It is still within the top 10, and it was also number 9 when the last survey was done in 2010. So it has been able to maintain its manufacturing competitiveness over the last 2 to 3 years. But if you look at the way the survey is done, the competitiveness is based on a lot of factors which include how the country is structured in terms of regulatory systems, in terms of the overall infrastructure. So there are a lot of other parameters which are also included as far as judging that competitiveness is concerned. Some parts where Singapore is really weak is in terms of market and also in terms of the cost related to the manufacturing activity. But what is important to note is there are a lot of other ASEAN countries which are also coming up as part of the top 20 as far as manufacturing competitiveness is concerned. So it is extremely important from Singapore's context to really ensure that this competitiveness can stay in the future as well. And one aspect which I think was touched upon yesterday as well when the productivity study was examined and I think presented here yesterday. One of the important component is productivity. Now if you look at productivity, if you look at the average growth of productivity over the last 5 years, we see that it has grown at about 1.6% on an average from 2006 to 2013. If you look at it from a 10-year perspective, it is even slightly lesser than that, somewhere around 1 to 1.2%. So productivity in Singapore has been growing between 1 to 1.5% over the last decade. And interestingly, in 2010 we had the ESC report, which actually recommended that productivity has to grow at the rate of anywhere between 2 to 3% as far as Singapore is concerned for it to remain competitive. And as Sergey was mentioning earlier, productivity is extremely difficult to implement, and we are seeing it as far as the Singapore context is concerned. And that is why the whole thinking is now moving away from just improving efficiencies, from improving productivity, to looking at a wider aspect of how companies can improve revenues from a different way, rather than focusing very internally on how to improve efficiency. And that is the genesis of all the thought process that has come as far as business model innovation is concerned. So business model innovation, and I think I need not talk more about it, we just had a session on BMI. It really translates to how companies can look internally in the way that they operate, in the way that their business models are structured, and through that, innovate in such a way by which that they can grow their revenues, and in that process also help effectively in terms of improving their bottom line as well as productivity. So those are some of the linkages that we are also trying to establish as part of the survey. So when we do the detailed assessment of the survey, we also want to understand that implementation of BMI, does it translate to some impact for productivity and competitiveness of the organization as well, and which will be extremely important in Singapore's context, so that companies need not focus overly on productivity, which is again, as you know, it is very capital intensive. You need to spend a lot of money to improve productivity. So the other area is whether we can focus on BMI and see what kind of growth companies can achieve through that process. In terms of the survey, this is how we had actually structured the entire survey that we did. There were 3 components. So we did a global best practices study in terms of understanding what kind of BMI implementations are happening at a global level, which are the regions which are implementing BMI, and what are some of the initial outcomes of BMI implementation that we see. The second portion was related to an in-depth assessment and survey of Singapore manufacturing companies. We have done about 250 surveys as part of this particular exercise, where we have gone to manufacturing companies and done a very intense survey related to the business model innovation. And we also did focus group discussions, especially to understand what are the key challenges that certain industries are facing and how these challenges can be addressed through the process of business model innovation. And we also tried to establish that link in terms of understanding how the industry is likely to respond to a BMI-led initiative if it is implemented in Singapore. So those are some of the discussions that we had in focus group sessions as well. So these were the three key pillars on which the entire survey was structured. Now the outcome of this will be 3 industry reports. One will be looking at the overall Singapore manufacturing sector in terms of implementation of BMI, the relevance of HR factors in the context of BMI, and also looking at various areas as far as BMI implementation is concerned. And we will have special focus on 2 industries which are extremely important in Singapore's context, which is the electronics and the precision engineering. And here again, we have done a more detailed survey in terms of understanding what are the key issues and challenges for these industries and how BMI implementation can be led in these 2 sectors more specifically. So the final outcome will be the industry reports across these 3, and we will also give certain recommendations based on the outcome in terms of what can be the way forward for Singapore. We will be also be developing a toolkit by which companies can assess where they stand in terms of the BMI implementation. What are some of the key success factors of successful companies that we have seen, and how you as a company can just go and benchmark yourself in terms of where you stand as far as a BMI company is concerned. And then what are the areas that you can really work upon in terms of being a more BMI focused organization. So those will be the key outcomes of the final survey result. Now, as part of the evaluation for BMI, we use the business model innovation canvas in terms of looking at the various kinds of business model innovations that exist. And we categorized them into 3 different groups. The first one was the revenue model innovation, which looked at innovation as far as revenue models are concerned. And we also looked at how marketing and selling innovations related to business model can also be done as part of the overall revenue model innovation. The other 2 categories, one was the customer model innovation, where the innovation is related to how you look at customer segments, how you can differentiate them, and how you can create a wider growth related to the way that you segment your customers. You can also do it through customer engagement, and also how you can create new channels to the customer in terms of the BMI process. So this was the second group, and the third one was related to the organizational model, where how you can transform your organization internally to achieve certain business model innovation outputs. And we looked at the company cost structure as well as the organizational culture as the 2 key pillars within this particular category. So the business model canvas, if you have seen, has all of these laid out in a different format, but we wanted to kind of consolidate it into 3 groups, which made more cohesive sense as far as looking at some of the Singapore companies are concerned. We also did an extensive research in terms of understanding what were the key HR factors which had a great impact as far as companies are concerned in terms of implementing or even creating a business model innovation-led organization. And these were the 5 major pillars of HR that we have investigated. The first one is leadership, and leadership is looking at how leadership looks at innovation, how leadership determines the implementation of innovation and business model innovation within the enterprise. We also looked at the organizational mindset in terms of how organizations think, how organizations react in terms of the way that they do business, which is extremely important when you look at the BMI context. The third area, or the third pillar, was learning and development, where we looked at how companies are making their employees aware about business model innovation, Are they enhancing the skills of their employees in such a way that they begin to think about innovation and business model innovation in a much broader sense? The fourth one was very important, which is talent management, how you can retain people, how you can ensure that the investment that you make in your people in terms of skills, you are able to retain those people as far as your organization is concerned. And the final area was the corporate culture in terms of understanding how companies are structured in Singapore and what is the basic culture in which they operate. So these were the five main pillars under which we looked at the HR practices. There were a lot of sub-questions to each of these, and that was run as part of the overall survey that we did. Now just to give you a quick kind of perception about the survey, almost every survey interview that we did ranged between 1 to 1.5 hours. It was very, very intense in terms of the discussion that we did, in terms of the questions that we asked, to really get to understanding how Singapore companies understand BMI and what was their reaction in terms of understanding as well as implementation of BMI concepts in Singapore. The business model innovation is again broken into two major steps. The first one is related to how these ideas are generated within the company. Whether organizations allow free idea generation in terms of new and innovative concepts related to business models. How are these innovations evaluated within the organization? Who does that? What level, at what level does the company engage in terms of the generation of these ideas? And also how these ideas get tested in the organization. And the second important area related to implementation of BMI is how these ideas get implemented in the organization. So we broke up the HR-led factors into understanding them both from an idea generation perspective as well as an idea implementation perspective. So that was how the survey was structured in terms of understanding even the stages in which the BMI gets implemented within the organizations. So again, we covered the major industries as far as Singapore is concerned. The main intent was to cover more than 80% in terms of the GDP output as far as Singapore is concerned. And particular emphasis, as I said, was given to the electronics and the precision engineering, because these are very, very strong industries in Singapore, and they have a long history in terms of the development that we have seen as far as Singapore is concerned. So there was special focus, and there was a larger sample size for the electronics and the precision engineering sector. The other areas that we covered included aerospace, marine, printing, chemicals, biomedical, as well as general manufacturing. So these were the major sectors that were covered as part of the entire survey. So let's look at some of the preliminary findings that we found as part of the survey. Now, out of all of those companies, the companies that we surveyed, we did a small mix of both SMEs as well as MNCs. Now, MNCs was a very small fraction. We just did about 15 or so companies to really understand what MNCs are thinking as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. The larger focus was obviously on Singapore SMEs, and that formed the larger percentage as far as the survey is concerned. Now, if you look at the understanding of BMI for Singapore SMEs, today, more than 70% of Singapore SMEs were either completely unfamiliar or had just some notion of what BMI is. So that is, the first, important outcome of this particular survey, which really means that the whole concept of BMI is not really something that Singapore manufacturing companies are thinking about. They have not been exposed to it, and so definitely that's a huge area where investment will need to be made in making these companies aware about what business model innovation is. And so I also participated in a lot of interviews that I did personally as well. And in many cases what we found is a lot of companies were not familiar with the term business model innovation, but when we explained the details of what business model innovation was in terms of how you should look internally within your own business model and how you can innovate that process, I think it started to resonate in terms of the understanding that Singapore manufacturing companies had. So while the term itself was not familiar, they could understand the concept as we explained it during the process of the survey. And the direct outcome of that explanation was what you see in this chart over here. So while a lot of Singapore companies said that they were not familiar with the concept of BMI, in terms of the relevance, more than 60% said that this is extremely relevant to them as an organization. And they would definitely like to see business model innovation in some form or the other in terms of how they can actually implement that as part of their own process that they have. So this is a very, very important outcome as far as the survey is concerned. So although the familiarity is not at that level, Singapore manufacturing companies are really keen in terms of understanding this concept and are also feel that this is extremely relevant to them as far as their businesses are concerned. And within the various industries, we did find that both the precision engineering as well as the electronic sector were more receptive to considering that BMI is definitely relevant for them, and they would like to look and evaluate in terms of how they can use that in terms of their own business processes. So we also asked them, do you agree that your company should assess BMI and how it is impacting your industry? And again, 46% of them indicated that their company should do an assessment of BMI. So the results are very encouraging in terms of companies responding to what BMI is, and they're very open to this concept of looking and evaluating what are the possibilities for them within their organization in terms of implementation of BMI. Now here again you will see there are 32% of companies who said that BMI is not relevant for them. And they would not really want to evaluate BMI in terms of looking at it as, at least in the near term. And some of the feedback comes from a lot of companies who are very traditional in the way that they operate their business. A lot of them are very family-led organizations, and what they feel is that they are not ready, or their business structure is not ready for them to really look at BMI as an option for them in terms of implementation. So what they feel is that the environment in which that they are operating today does not really lend themselves to really looking at a BMI assessment that they want to do as part of the next step. So that's again an important conclusion. So while there is positive indication for about 50% of the companies who really want to look at the next step and assess, there is still 1/3 of the companies who feel that they are still not ready in terms of doing that assessment as of now. Of course, this is likely to change, and as I was discussing with Sergey also, we may probably need to do these kind of surveys in a repetitive, linear way to really understand if there is change over a period of time once there is more awareness which has been imparted to Singapore manufacturing companies. The other area, the other question that we asked is, what are the three most important factors that you will rate that will make your company think about implementing BMI? And these were more related to some of the key challenges that these companies faced in terms of their external environments. The number one was actually cost reduction. Most of Singapore manufacturers felt that cost was their single biggest issue in terms of their staying competitive. And that was the number one area which will make them think about looking at BMI. And I think some of the great examples that we saw is that BMI is not really focused on how you reduce your cost, but also look at how you can look at your existing process in terms of looking at the business differently and looking at new markets or businesses. So this is again, I think, a very, very important kind of outcome that we see from the survey. The other areas where Singapore manufacturers are extremely concerned, we related to market share. They see that their market share is eroding in terms of the competition that they are facing, both from their immediate neighbors as well as globally as well. They are extremely concerned about competitors coming into Singapore. They are extremely concerned about competitors taking away their market share, and what competitors are doing in terms of their, in the product range that they are operating. So these were the top three issues which Singapore companies felt are extremely relevant for them, are extremely important for them, and which will help them consider BMI as an option in terms of the way that they operate their business in the future. So some of the others were looking at risk reduction, financial performance, pressure from the value chain, as well as something that they would like to do regularly as an assessment as far as their business model is concerned. So these were some of the key inputs that we got from the survey in terms of what will drive Singapore companies towards looking at BMI. We also asked Singapore companies in terms of what are some of the key challenges related to market conditions that they face. How challenging it is for companies today to operate with manufacturing in Singapore. And again, I think this is not a very big surprise that more than 80% really feel that they are working in a very, very challenging environment today, and they really need to find some solutions in terms of how they can continue to be competitive and continue to stay relevant in Singapore as far as manufacturing is concerned. So these are extremely key inputs in terms of understanding what are the key issues and challenges which Singapore manufacturing companies are facing. This outcome is actually very surprising, and we were also very surprised when we actually tried to correlate what companies feel in terms of the key external challenges, and also asking them how satisfied they were in terms of the company performance over the last 5 years. Now, if you look at Singapore manufacturing companies, a lot of these companies have not really grown very substantially in the last 5 years. They've either grown anywhere between the range of 1 to 5%. But a vast majority, or almost 1/3 of all of those surveyed were very neutral in terms of the reaction to to their company performance. Neither were they completely dissatisfied, neither were they completely satisfied. So they were somewhere in the middle in terms of judging how their company's financial performance has been over the past 5 years. And if you look at 1, 2, and 3, which I think really states that companies are either completely unsatisfied to being, say, somewhat satisfied, it is a large portion in terms of the overall Singapore context. And the other big area is that while companies are facing immense challenges, they know that their competitiveness is shrinking, they are still satisfied with the kind of performance that they have. So if you look at between satisfied and completely satisfied, that is again a good 50% in terms of the companies that we serve. So very, very different views in terms of how companies view themselves in terms of their opportunities for growth. And I think that is a very, very key indicator, because when we talk to companies, a lot of these companies actually felt that we don't have the potential to grow in Singapore beyond a certain point. So even if they grow at 1, 2, 3, 5%, they feel that they have achieved what they want in terms of financial performance. So that's again a very, very important message, that somewhere down the line, Singapore manufacturing organizations have kind of created a sense for themselves that this is the rate by which that they can grow the company. And if you look at some of the examples, and I think Xiaomi is probably one of the great examples. It started 3 years ago and probably a $5 billion company today. So there is huge potential for growth, but this is not the mindset that we see as far as Singapore manufacturing organization is concerned. So I think there needs to be a dramatic change as far as companies understanding where they can grow, how they can grow, and this makes BMI a very, very relevant tool for them to really look at how they can achieve higher growth potential for their organizations. Sorry. So as part of that survey, we also asked a lot of companies, if you really want to implement BMI, looking at your market challenges today, what kind of support or what level of support that you would need in terms of implementation. And I think a significant number of companies actually came forward to say that they would need a lot of help in terms of understanding these concepts of BMI, in terms of having the ability to implement some of these concepts within the organization. So I think Singapore manufacturing companies would need a lot of support in terms of implementation of BMI in the future. If BMI is being looked at as a very, very important tool in terms of helping companies improve their revenues. And given the tough market challenges that they are facing, where almost 80% of the companies are facing very, very competitive environments, I think this really speaks of how government agencies, maybe SMF, or some of the other organizations will need to step in and support Singapore SMEs as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. Within the HR factors, at the top level, so we identified those 5 pillars as far as implementation of BMI is concerned related to HR factors. And we asked Singapore companies to rank which were the top 3 in terms of HR factors which are very, very relevant as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. And leadership, organizational mindset, and corporate culture were the top 3 that companies stated were the most important for them as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. And in a lot of surveys that we did, where we talked to general managers, even owners of the company, a lot of them stated that, all in the current situation, typically all idea generation and implementation happens only at the top level, either at the director or at the owner level. The engagement of people across the organization is extremely limited in terms of implementation of innovative ideas are concerned in most Singapore manufacturing companies. So leadership becomes a very, very important outcome as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. And there has to be a lot of change at the leadership level, where leadership begins to believe that that business model innovation is a tool that is going to help them improve their business processes in the future and also help them grow their business. And that is where it is going to start from in terms of the implementation process. So that's again, as I said, a very, very important ranking as far as the various HR parameters are concerned. The organizational mindset and corporate culture are, I think, very deeply seated as far as Singapore manufacturing companies are concerned. A lot of companies that we talk to say that, we are in a very, very traditional business. So if you go to a precision engineering company, they say that our business is, we come from a very traditional mindset. We really cannot even think today of how we can implement BMI as a tool as far as growth of my industry is concerned, or growth for my organization is concerned. So there is a lot of, both the mindset as well as the culture that will need to be broken as far as implementation of BMI is concerned within these organizations. So the important question is, how many companies as part of the survey that we found were really implementing BMI today? So as I said, we looked at almost 250 companies in Singapore, and what we find is, we find about 15 companies who are really looking at BMI and who have implemented BMI in a serious way, which has impacted their revenue growth over the last 5 years. There are a lot of companies who said that they have thought about certain areas, they have thought about certain ways by which they can innovate, but very few of them have actually implemented those kind of solutions in the organizations. But if you look at it in terms of percentage, and when we did the literature research around business model innovation, we found that there are certain studies which have been published in Europe as well, which talk about business model innovation in SMEs to the tune of about 5 to 6%. And if I look at this percentage, 15 out of 250, it is very much there as far as Singapore companies are concerned. So it is around 6% in Singapore as well, which actually kind of supports some of the studies that have been done in Europe and other regions as well. So BMI as a concept is again, even if you look at by European standard, which is slightly ahead of Singapore, in terms of actual implementation, the percentage is still about 5.5%. So this is not a bad outcome as far as the survey is concerned, and as far as identifying some of the companies who are in the process of implementing BMI. And I think some of these companies were also awarded. There were other companies who also joined as part of the survey, who got the award during the dinner. And I think it is a very, very positive first step as far as BMI implementation is concerned. And the whole drive towards companies looking and understanding BMI as a potential tool and source for growth in the future is concerned. So in terms of the spread within the different industries, we found BMI implementations happening in electronics, precision engineering, and printing. So these were the three sectors where we found the majority of BMI implementations as part of the survey. So one aspect of this particular survey is to understand how BMI companies are different from other companies. And this will also form part of the toolkit that we want to give to Singapore companies when they start to benchmark themselves with companies that have already implemented BMI. And these are some of the key traits that we see in terms of companies who have already implemented BMI in Singapore. So one of the things that we find is that their growth rate is much, much better than the industry growth rate. So they have performed much better in comparison with the growth rate of the industry. And in certain cases, we have found growth rates to be as high as 15 to 20% over the last 5 years, the way that they have grown their companies. So within the same sector, there are certain companies which are growing at a much, much faster rate, mainly because they are looking at business model innovation as an opportunity to grow their business. The other important aspect that we found is that BMI ideas are coming from all levels within the organization. It is not only restricted to the owner or the director or maybe the key people within the organization. They are looking for ideas from the people, from the different layers within the company in terms of generating these ideas, generating innovative ideas. So that's again a key difference that we find between BMI and non-BMI companies. The other trait that we find is a lot of them are risk takers. They are willing to take that risk and to step out from their comfort zone that they are in today. In a lot of discussions that I have had with Singapore manufacturing companies, many of them have stated that we have turned away orders because we have issues in terms of delivery, we don't have manpower, we have issues related to the ability to meet orders. So companies in certain examples, companies are willing to turn away business mainly because they are not able to meet the customer requirements given the challenges that they are operating in. But they are not willing to consider how I can innovate my business process so that I can still continue to meet more and more customer requirements. So there are key issues within the manufacturing organizations, and BMI-led companies we found have taken that step to break out of that comfort zone and begin to take risks in terms of innovating in the way that they innovate that business model. Another key trait is that they empower employees. They empower employees to take risks, they empower employees to fail, they empower employees to generate ideas. Of course, they are always wary of the fact that they don't want to disrupt what they are doing today, but they are also willing to take small steps in terms of innovation which they allow their employees to take within the organization. A lot of these companies, and when we looked at the earlier pull factors which induced companies to go for BMI, all the BMI companies that we surveyed said that these key pull factors were very, very relevant for them, and that is the reason why they went into implementation of BMI. So this is again a very consistent factor that we found across all of the BMI companies. And the other key areas, of course, they also face the same competitive pressures as the other organizations are facing, and that actually led them to looking at BMI as an option. And also, some of these companies already had an understanding of BMI. And I think that is very, very relevant in the context of this study and how we really want to take this study forward over the next 3 or 5 years. Because if companies already have certain indicators about understanding of BMI, they are more willing to implement BMI within their organizations. But as we saw in the first part of the survey, 70% of the companies don't even know what BMI is today. So I think if the survey changes maybe after 2 years from now, where 70% of the companies say that they already know BMI, I'm sure the numbers that we see will also change very, very dramatically, because that is also a key input as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. So in terms of the way forward, I think the first step that really needs to happen is start generating interest as far as BMI is concerned. Some of the tools that will come out of this particular survey, especially the assessment tool that we want to develop, will definitely help Singapore manufacturing companies to assess where they stand in terms of BMI and what are the areas that they need to focus on in terms of implementing BMI within their organizations. The second step is then to create awareness, and these awareness can be done through forums like these, through seminars, and also through maybe certain ways by which associations or agencies can help and support the spread of awareness as far as BMI is concerned. But that itself will not be enough, because when we did the focus group discussion, a lot of companies said that just having awareness of BMI is not going to be enough for them. There needs to be a certain amount of hand-holding in terms of how we will be able to implement BMI within the company. So we will need a specific hand-holding in the entire implementation of BMI within the organization. How do we look at it? How do we evaluate our organization? All of that will be areas where companies will seek help in terms of implementation of BMI within the organizations. And so that support has to be given to them as part of the implementation of BMI. And all of these steps, I think, over the next few years can lead to an environment where BMI becomes a way by which companies evaluate. So innovation is not only restricted to technology or process or products, but BMI becomes a way of life as far as looking at innovative processes are concerned within the organization when companies look at growth in the long-term strategy for their organizations. And what we feel is that since BMI is very nascent, it's very new to Singapore, I think the government will have to really support it in a very big way in terms of creating this awareness of BMI within Singapore. And really help Singapore manufacturing companies understand the concept, understand how they can implement, and understand how they can take it forward to the next step as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. And these include providing case studies, providing best examples. Like for example, we have I think 8 awardees for BMI. How we can showcase these case studies to a wider audience in terms of how these companies really looked at BMI and innovated as far as their growth is concerned. And then finally to the stage of where they can provide support as far as implementation is concerned. So these will be the key steps as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. So with that, thank you very much for listening. As I said, these are preliminary outcomes from the survey that we have done. What is good is that Singapore companies are very open today to think about BMI, to look at BMI as an option as far as their growth is concerned, and a lot of them, more than 50% today, are definitely willing to take the next step in terms of evaluating BMI, in terms of how they can implement it in their own company's context. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's please give Mr. Satish a round of applause. And yes, Mr. Satish is welcoming a question or two. Is anyone keen to participate? Please raise your hand. We'll have a microphone sent to you right away. Anyone? One question in the middle right there. Thank you. Can you please introduce yourself and the company you represent? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Day2, Workforce Insight from Australia. Just interested if you, in the study, whether you've come across any of those, I guess, traditional companies that, for whatever reason, found themselves embarking on an innovation journey, and what that catalyst was, whether a change of leadership or market conditions, something like that. Because I guess you talked about 232, but I'm sure there's examples of traditional companies that have started an innovation journey.
Yeah, as I showed you in the result, if you look at the 14 companies that you identified who have, in some way, form or the other, implemented BMI as a solution, the precision engineering and electronic sectors were actually one of the key contributors to BMI. And those are very, very traditional, industries in Singapore. And if you look at both the precision engineering and electronics, these are very high investment manufacturing areas where, the manufacturing processes are very traditional. The way that the manufacturing is done is very, very traditional. And so it was very encouraging for us when we saw examples of BMI within precision engineering as well as electronics, that we know that a lot of service companies and a lot of other companies have innovated their business models. But it was very heartening to see electronics and precision engineering companies also leading as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. So definitely, these are traditional companies, and we do feel that traditional companies can also look at BMI as a way by which they can grow their revenues in comparison to the industry.
Did that answer your question, sir? On the microphone, sir. Thank you.
Sorry, what was different about, what was the factor that was different for those organisations? Was it a leadership or a market issue? If you can recall, it might have been one that you.
So I think it starts from leadership. I did give you some examples of what how these companies are different from the others, and there you saw that leadership was much more involved as far as implementation of BMI is concerned. Typically, we have seen that if the leadership is not sincere, if the leadership is not willing to take that risk, if the leadership is not willing to invest in people, to think about innovative ways by which they can do business, none of this actually goes forward. So while the factors which lead to BMI are still the same for both BMI as well as non-BMI companies, the difference is that the leadership in a lot of these companies have taken that extra step, are willing to take that risk to think differently and implement these BMI solutions within their organization. I think that's the key differentiating factor that we see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, please, for Mr. Satish Lele? Well, that should wrap it up then. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please give Mr. Satish another big round of applause. Thank you. Mr. Satish also did mention earlier that, of course, with regards to BMI, one of the first key answering that question earlier was, of course, dependent on leadership and of course, creating awareness of BMI through such platforms as SIPC 2014, and also hand-holding via government agencies to lead business owners, SMEs, etc., to incorporate BMI or to explore BMI further. And one such hand-holding agency is within our foyer as well as one of our exhibitors, happens to be A-Star. Now, let's just explore BMI from the technology angle. We are coming to terms that technology can be a key enabler to help companies gain efficiencies. Now, to keep us updated on our upcoming trends and to understand what's available, the help that companies can utilize to transform and to grow their business through technology innovation, we'd like to welcome Mr. Liao Eng Soon. He's the Director of Science and Engineering Council, also known as SERC, an agency for science